That pin is fake. The words cut through the hangar before the morning engines had even warmed. Lieutenant Evan Brooks stood beside the nose of an F/A-18, one hand resting on his helmet, the other pointing straight at the small silver flight pin on Commander Claire Bennett's chest. For a second, every sound around them seemed to fall away. The rolling tool cart stopped halfway across the concrete. A crew chief looked up from an open inspection panel. Two pilots near the coffee station went quiet with their cups still in their hands. Claire did not move. She stood beneath the cold white lights of Hangar 3 in a faded Navy flight suit, her dark blonde hair pulled tight at the back of her head, her boots clean but worn at the edges, her face calm in a way that made her look almost detached from the insult. The pin on her left side was not bright like the new wings the younger pilots wore after graduation. It was dull silver, scratched along the lower edge, one side darkened as if heat had kissed the metal and never fully let go. Its shape was simple at first glance, a pair of wings around a small center shield, but the right wing bent slightly downward, broken by design or by history. Nobody in the squadron recognized it. That was the problem. To Evan Brooks, anything not printed in a manual or worn by someone he already respected looked suspicious. He was 31, sharp-jawed, academy proud, with the kind of confidence that came from always being praised before he was truly tested. He had heard that a new commander was joining their air group before the Admiral's ceremony that afternoon, but he had expected someone loud, decorated, impossible to miss. Not this quiet woman standing alone beside the briefing table with a weathered helmet bag at her feet and no interest in explaining herself. Claire lowered her eyes to the pin, touched its edge once with her thumb, then looked back at him. "Are you sure you want to say that out loud?" Her voice was soft, almost courteous. That made a few people shift where they stood. It was not fear in her tone. It was warning. Evan gave a short laugh, glancing around to see who was watching. Enough people were. That seemed to strengthen him. "I'm saying what everyone's thinking, ma'am. That is not a standard Navy flight pin. I've never seen it in any award chart, training pipeline, or squadron display. So unless there's a story you want to share, you might want to take it off before Admiral Calder walks in." Claire's expression did not change. Behind her, morning light slipped through the hangar doors and stretched across the concrete in long pale bands. Outside, flags snapped in a clean coastal wind. Inside, men and women who had spent years around aircraft suddenly watched one small piece of metal as if it might answer for itself. Claire picked up her gloves from the table and folded them with slow precision. "Some things are not issued where everyone can see them," she said. Evan's smile thinned. "That sounds convenient." A younger pilot near him gave a nervous chuckle, then stopped when Claire turned her head slightly. Her eyes were blue, steady, and colder than the hangar air. She did not look offended. She looked like someone measuring distance, weather, timing, and risk without needing to write any of it down. Evan mistook her silence for weakness. Most people did, at least once. He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to make it seem personal while still letting the room hear. "You know what bothers me? Real pilots earn what they wear. We log the hours. We pass the checks. We take the pressure. We don't walk in with pretty little mystery badges and expect everyone to pretend they mean something." The words landed harder than he expected. Across the hangar, an older maintenance chief slowly set down his wrench. A lieutenant at the back stopped smiling. Claire only looked at the pin again. The damaged wing caught the light for a moment, flashing silver through the dark scar along its edge. For the first time, something moved behind her calm face. Not anger, not shame, but memory. It passed quickly. Evan saw none of it. He reached toward the pin, not quite touching it yet, but close enough for the whole room to feel the line being crossed. Claire's hand came up and caught his wrist before his fingers reached her chest. She did not twist. She did not shove. She simply stopped him with a grip so controlled that Evan froze more from surprise than pain. The hangar went completely still. Claire released him after 1 second. "Don't touch it," she said. No one laughed now. For one full second, Lieutenant Evan Brooks stared at his own wrist as if it no longer belonged to him. Claire Bennett had already let go, but the message remained in the air, clean and unmistakable. Do not touch what you have not earned the right to understand. Around them, Hangar 3 seemed to wake back up in pieces. A socket clicked against concrete. Someone cleared his throat. Far outside, a jet engine whined low along the flight line, but inside the hangar, No one moved with the easy rhythm they had carried a minute earlier. Evan pulled his hand back and forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. His pride had been checked in front of mechanics, pilots, junior officers, and 2 visiting staff members from Fleet Command. That was worse than being corrected. To a man like Evan, embarrassment needed an enemy, and Claire had just become one. That was unnecessary, he said, rubbing his wrist though there was nothing to rub. Claire placed her gloves beside her helmet bag. So was reaching for my uniform. The answer was quiet, but it carried farther than a shout. A few faces turned away, not wanting to be caught reacting. Evan glanced at them, reading their silence as judgment, and his jaw tightened. The morning had been arranged for ceremony, not confrontation. Blue and gold banners hung from the upper rails. Rows of folding chairs stood near the open hangar doors, waiting for the Admiral's remarks. A polished podium had been set beneath the American flag and the Navy flag, both perfectly still inside the building while the coastal wind moved hard outside. On the far wall, a temporary display showed photographs from old naval aviation missions, most of them cleared for public viewing, most of them safe enough to explain. The ceremony was supposed to honor courage, service, and the pilots who had never asked for applause. Claire had arrived before most of the squadron, carrying only a helmet bag, a thin personnel folder, and that strange damaged pin over her heart. She had signed in at the duty desk without asking for attention. She had nodded to the maintenance crew. She had walked the hangar floor as if every aircraft was a person she knew by sound, shape, and shadow. The crew chief, Senior Chief Alan Mercer, had noticed that first. He had watched hundreds of aviators cross his hangars over 29 years in uniform. Some moved like performers. Some moved like students pretending to be veterans. Claire moved like weather. Quiet, exact, impossible to hurry. When she passed beneath the wing of the nearest Hornet, she had tilted her head just enough to avoid a pitot cover without looking up. When a young airman dropped a checklist behind her, she picked it up, handed it back, and said, "Do not rush the small things. The sky keeps receipts." The airman had blinked, nodded, and stood straighter after she walked away. Nobody laughed then because nobody knew what to do with her. She was not cold, but she did not invite closeness. She was not arrogant, but she carried a kind of distance that made questions feel intrusive. Her face was calm, almost beautiful in its restraint, with pale skin touched by long hours under open sky and eyes that did not wander when people spoke. The younger pilots had filled in the gaps with assumptions. A transfer from administration. A public affairs favorite. Maybe someone sent ahead of the Admiral for ceremony optics. Evan Brooks had been the first to say it aloud, but he had not been the first to think it. Claire knew that. She had felt that kind of room before. Rooms where men and women looked at her uniform before they looked at her record. Rooms where silence became a test. Rooms where a woman had to decide whether proving herself was worth the cost of opening a past she had buried carefully. She looked toward the ceremony display, where one photograph showed a night deck under red lights and rain. The image was grainy, almost useless to anyone else. To Claire, it had a sound. Radio static. Wind shear. A warning tone that would not stop. She blinked once, and the hangar returned. Evan stepped back toward the group of pilots near the coffee station, trying to recover his ground. "I am just saying we have standards," he said louder now. "Before the Admiral arrives, somebody should verify what people are wearing in this hangar." Claire picked up her helmet bag. The damaged pin caught the light again, small and stubborn against the faded green of her flight suit. She did not look at Evan when she answered. "Verification is coming." The words followed Claire across the hangar, but she did not slow down. She carried her helmet bag toward the row of folding chairs near the ceremony area and set it beneath the seat at the end, the place closest to the side exit and farthest from the podium. It was an old habit, choosing the corner with the clearest line of sight, the easiest path out, and the least attention. Evan Brooks watched her from near the coffee station, still trying to turn his accusation into a matter of principle. "Verification is exactly what I want," he said to the pilots around him. "Because if that thing is real, someone should be able to identify it. And if it is not, she should not be wearing it in a Navy hangar." A few people nodded because nodding was safer than disagreeing with a loud man in a room that had gone uncertain. Lieutenant Mason Reed, one of Evan's closest friends, leaned against the table and studied Claire like she was a puzzle he did not want solved. "Maybe it is some foreign exchange pin," he said. Or one of those commemorative pieces they sell at air shows. Another pilot, Ensign Tyler Grant, gave a small laugh. Looks like it came from an antique store. Claire heard them clearly. Hangars carried sound in strange ways. A whisper near a wheel chock could travel beneath a wing and arrive sharp as a command. She unzipped her helmet bag and removed a folded cloth, then laid her flight helmet on her knees. It was white with a narrow black stripe down the center and a tiny painted mark near the back, the same broken wing shape as the pin. Not flashy, not decorative, just there, as if it had survived being erased. Senior Chief Mercer saw the mark and stopped walking. He had been moving toward an equipment cabinet with a clipboard in one hand, but the moment his eyes settled on the little symbol, his face changed. It was not recognition yet. It was the feeling before recognition, when memory opens a locked door from the inside. He glanced from the helmet to the pin, then to Claire's face. Claire noticed him noticing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mercer looked away first, not out of disrespect, but because some things felt too heavy to stare at. Evan missed that exchange. He was too busy performing certainty. He stepped closer to the display wall where the old mission photographs had been mounted, gesturing toward rows of official squadron wings and award insignia. "See, this is the problem," he said. "We spend years learning what these symbols mean. We do not get to invent new ones because they look dramatic." The word dramatic brought a few uneasy smiles. Claire ran the cloth once across the curve of her helmet visor. Her movements were slow, measured, almost ceremonial. She remembered another morning, years earlier, when her hands had done the same thing on the deck of a carrier 300 miles from the nearest coastline. The air had smelled like salt, fuel, and rain. Her call sign had not yet become a rumor. Back then, she had been just Bennett, quiet enough to be underestimated and stubborn enough to be assigned the flights nobody wanted. She had learned that the sky did not care who doubted you. The sky only asked whether your hands stayed steady when the instruments stopped making promises. In Hangar 3, the pilots continued circling around the question of her pin without asking her the only question that mattered. Where did it come from? Evan finally turned back to her. "Commander Bennett," he said, putting emphasis on the rank now, as if politeness could sharpen an insult. "I am giving you a chance to clear this up before Admiral Calder arrives. What unit issued that pin?" Claire looked up from the helmet. "One that does not appear on your display." Mason Reed muttered. "Convenient again." Claire stood, holding the helmet at her side. The room quieted without anyone ordering it. She walked toward the mission photographs and stopped beneath the grainy image of a rain-dark flight deck under red lights. Her eyes stayed on the photograph for a long moment. "You are looking for proof in the wrong place," she said. Evan folded his arms. "Then put it in the right place." Claire turned toward him. "No." The answer was so simple that it stripped the room of movement. Evan's face hardened. "No." Claire stepped away from the wall, the damaged pin resting over her heart, the broken wing catching a blade of morning light. "I do not owe my history to anyone who begins with an accusation." Evan Brooks stared at Claire as though the word had reached him late. No, it was not loud, not emotional, not even defensive. That was what made it land so cleanly. She had not asked for permission to keep her silence. She had simply kept it. Around the display wall, the younger pilots exchanged looks, waiting for Evan to decide whether this would end or become something uglier in spirit, even if no one raised a hand. The ceremony chairs sat in perfect rows behind them, empty and patient. The podium waited beneath the flags. Somewhere outside, a petty officer tested a microphone and a brief squeal of feedback echoed through the open hangar doors, then disappeared into the morning air. Claire turned away from Evan and returned to her helmet, but the conversation did not release her. It followed her like a shadow. Mason Reed spoke first, quieter than Evan but sharper around the edges. "With respect, Commander, nobody is asking for your life story. We are asking why you are wearing an insignia nobody recognizes." Claire picked up her gloves and slid them through the strap of her helmet bag. "That is not what he asked." Evan's eyes narrowed. "I asked because standards matter." "Standards do matter," Claire said. She looked toward the nearest aircraft, where a junior maintainer was pretending to inspect a panel he had already inspected twice. "That is why you do not touch another officer's uniform. That is why you do not accuse without evidence. That is why a room full of aviators should know the difference between curiosity and disrespect." The words were not delivered like a speech. They were delivered like checklist items, each one short, useful, and impossible to decorate. Evan felt the room tilt slightly away from him. He could sense it in the shoulders around him, in the way the crew chief no longer pretended to be busy, in the way Ensign Grant looked down at his coffee instead of laughing. So he pushed harder. Fine. Evidence. I will get it. He turned toward the duty desk near the hangar office. Somebody pull the insignia registry. Let us make this official. Senior Chief Mercer finally stepped forward. His voice was rough from years of flight deck wind and early mornings. Lieutenant, that may not be wise. Evan looked back at him. Senior Chief, with all due respect, this is not maintenance. Mercer held his clipboard against his side. No, sir. It is judgment. And you are moving fast without enough of it. A few people looked at Mercer in surprise. He was not known for inserting himself into officer disputes. He believed in torque specs, clean tools, and letting rank handle rank. But his eyes kept returning to the broken wing on Claire's pin, and the longer he looked, the less certain he became that this was just a strange decoration. Claire saw the conflict on his face. Recognition was close now, circling him like a call sign heard through static. She gave him the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. Mercer understood enough to stop. Evan did not. He had already walked to the duty desk and begun speaking with the young operations clerk seated behind the computer. Pull up official aviation insignia. Navy, Marine Corps, Joint Command, classified exceptions if your access allows it. The clerk, Petty Officer Second Class Daniel Price, glanced at Claire, then at Evan. Sir, my access will not show everything. Show what it shows. Price began typing. The sound of the keyboard seemed too small for the attention it drew. Claire remained near the chairs, straight-backed and still. She did not look trapped. She looked like someone standing beside a closed door, hoping no one foolish would force it open. On the screen, rows of approved wings and badges appeared. Standard naval aviator wings. Test pilot insignia. Flight surgeon badges. Squadron patches. Commemorative emblems. Evan leaned over the desk, scanning each image with growing confidence. There, he said, loud enough for the hangar. Nothing like it. Claire closed her eyes for half a breath. When she opened them, the morning had sharpened. Evan turned from the computer with the satisfaction of a man who thought a database had become truth. Commander Bennett, I am going to ask you one more time. Remove the pin until it can be verified by proper authority. Claire looked past him toward the open hangar doors. A black staff car had just rolled into view beyond the sunlit concrete. Two sailors near the entrance straightened immediately. The flags outside snapped hard in the wind. Claire picked up her helmet bag and set it gently on the chair beside her. Proper authority, she said, almost to herself, has arrived. The black staff car stopped just beyond the hangar doors, its polished surface reflecting the pale coastal sky. Two sailors moved at once, one stepping forward to open the rear door, the other bringing his hand up in a crisp salute before the Admiral had even fully emerged. The change in the hangar was immediate. Conversations died. Coffee cups were set down. Pilots straightened their backs and mechanics stepped clear of the aircraft with the instinctive respect that follows real rank into a room. Admiral Thomas Calder stepped out wearing service dress blues, his cap set low against the wind, his posture steady despite the years carved into his face. He was not a large man, but he carried the kind of presence that made space organize itself around him. The sailors at the entrance called the room to attention, and every uniform in Hangar 3 snapped into place. Every uniform except Claire Bennett's moved with visible urgency. Claire was already still. She stood near the end of the ceremony rows, helmet bag beside her, hands relaxed at her sides, the damaged flight pin resting over her heart. If she felt anything as Admiral Calder entered, she did not show it. Her face remained calm, but Senior Chief Mercer saw her thumb brush once against the seam of her flight suit, a small motion, almost invisible, like a pilot checking a switch by memory. Evan Brooks stood near the duty desk, caught between victory and uncertainty. The registry screen behind him still displayed the official insignia list, and for one fading second, he seemed to believe it would protect him. Admiral Calder walked into the hangar with two aides behind him. Captain Denise Hall, the base operations officer, greeted him first and began speaking about the ceremony schedule, the honored guests, the weather window, and the planned flyover. Calder listened, nodded once, then looked past her. His eyes moved across the aircraft, the flags, the rows of chairs, and the pilots standing at attention. Then they stopped on Claire. Nothing dramatic happened at first. He did not call her name. He did not smile. He simply stopped walking. That was enough. Captain Hall turned to see what had taken his attention. So did the aides. So did Evan. The Admiral's gaze dropped from Claire's face to the small silver pin on her chest. The broken wing caught a strip of sunlight from the hangar doors and flashed once, not bright, but unmistakable. Calder's expression changed in a way that made the room feel colder. The official mask fell away. What replaced it was not surprise. It was remembrance. The kind that arrives with weight, not noise. Claire held his eyes across the concrete. For the first time all morning, her stillness looked less like restraint and more like endurance. Admiral Calder took one step toward her, then another. The aides moved to follow, but he lifted one hand slightly, and they stopped. Every person in the hangar remained at attention, waiting for an explanation no one had the courage to ask for. Evan swallowed. He glanced from Calder to Claire, then back to the computer screen, as if the missing emblem in the registry might suddenly appear and correct the air around him. It did not. Calder continued walking until he stood a few feet in front of Claire Bennett. Up close, the years between them seemed to collapse. He looked at the pin again, and his jaw tightened with an old emotion he refused to let spill. "Commander Bennett," he said quietly. The rank sounded different in his voice. Not routine. Not administrative. Earned. Claire gave a small nod. "Admiral Calder." For a moment, neither of them said anything else. The hangar held its breath. Then Evan, unable to bear the silence, stepped forward half a pace. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption, but there was a question about that insignia. It does not appear in the registry, and I was asking the commander to remove it until proper verification could be provided." Captain Hall's eyes cut toward him sharply, but Admiral Calder did not turn around. He kept looking at Claire, at the damaged metal over her heart, at the bent wing that no database in that room had been cleared to name. When he finally spoke, his voice carried through the hangar without needing volume. "Lieutenant Brooks, there are things in this Navy that are not absent from the registry because they are false." He paused. "They are absent because the people who earned them paid for silence." Evan's face lost color. Claire's eyes lowered for half a second, not in shame, but in memory. Calder reached up slowly, removed his cap, and held it against his side. The movement was simple, formal, devastating. An admiral had taken off his cap in front of a commander while the entire hangar watched. "Claire," he said, softer now, "I never thanked you in front of witnesses." The sentence moved through Hangar 3 with more force than any command. "I never thank you in front of witnesses." No one shifted. No one coughed. Even the wind outside seemed to fall behind the open doors and wait. Claire Bennett looked at the admiral's cap held at his side, then at the man himself. For a brief moment, the years between them surfaced in her eyes, not as a story she wanted told, but as a weather system she had survived and carried quietly ever since. "Sir," she said, her voice steady, "you did not have to." Admiral Calder gave the smallest shake of his head. "Yes, I did." He turned then, not fully away from her, but enough for the hangar to hear him clearly. "Most of you know this ceremony is connected to a classified operation from 12 years ago. The public record calls it a recovery flight in severe weather. That is not wrong. It is just incomplete." Captain Hall stood near the podium, her face tightened with professional restraint. The aides behind Calder exchanged a glance, but neither interrupted. The admiral had chosen his line carefully. He would not break classification. He would not turn a private wound into spectacle. But he would not let a lie stand in the place of honor. "At the time," Calder continued, "I was a captain assigned to a carrier group operating more than 400 miles off the North Atlantic coast. The weather had closed in faster than forecast. Visibility was poor. Navigation signals were unreliable. Communications came and went in pieces." Claire's gaze drifted toward the grainy photograph on the display wall, the one with the red deck lights blurred by rain. The room followed her eyes, and suddenly the photograph seemed less decorative. Evan Brooks stood very still beside the duty desk. The insignia registry glowed behind him, useless and bright. Calder's voice remained low, but it carried the weight of someone choosing every word. 2 aircraft were separated from formation during a return sequence. One had instrument failure. One was low on fuel. The rescue window was narrow, and the safest decision for every remaining pilot was to hold position and wait for conditions to improve. He paused. Commander Bennett did not hold position. Claire lowered her eyes. The hangar seemed to lean toward the sentence. Calder looked back at her, and his expression softened without losing command. She was a lieutenant then. Young, quiet, already better than most people knew, because she wasted no energy trying to convince them. Her aircraft had taken weather damage. Her systems were not giving her clean answers. She had every reason to turn back. No one breathed loudly now. Senior Chief Mercer's hand had gone still around his clipboard. The young airman, near the inspection panel, stared at Claire as if the woman who had told him the sky kept receipts had suddenly become the receipt itself. Calder lifted his cap slightly, not wearing it, only holding it as if he needed both hands occupied to keep the memory contained. She found us anyway, not with perfect instruments, not with perfect conditions, with judgment, with discipline, with the kind of calm you cannot teach in a classroom. The word "us" settled over the room. Evan's eyes flicked to the Admiral, then to Claire, understanding arriving too late to be graceful. Calder continued. The broken wing on that pin is not decoration. It marks the aircraft she brought home after guiding others through a night most of us were not expected to walk away from. It was shaped from metal recovered after that mission. Only a handful were made. Not for display, not for promotion, for remembrance. Claire's face did not change, but her hand closed once at her side. That was the only sign. The Admiral turned fully toward Evan now. Lieutenant Brooks, that pin is not in your registry because you do not have the clearance to know why it exists. Evan's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Calder did not raise his voice. He did not need to. And you asked her to remove it. The accusation was not loud. It was worse. It was disappointed. Evan looked at Claire then, truly looked at her for the first time that morning. Not at the pin, not at the faded flight suit, not at the quiet face he had mistaken for softness. At her. Claire met his gaze without triumph. That was what broke the room open. She did not want him humiliated. She wanted him better than he had been 5 minutes ago. Calder placed his cap back under his arm and faced her again. Commander Bennett, on behalf of every aviator who made it home that night, and those who have carried the story in silence, thank you. He bowed his head, not deeply, but enough for every person in the hangar to understand. Claire stood still beneath the flags, the scarred silver wing over her heart catching the morning light. For several seconds after the Admiral's thanks, the hangar remained silent in a way Claire Bennett knew too well. It was the silence that came after people realized they had been standing too close to something sacred without knowing it. Not sacred because it was dramatic. Sacred because it had cost something. Claire gave Admiral Calder a small nod, no more than the moment required. Thank you, sir, she said. Her voice did not shake, but it had lost the distance it carried earlier. Just a little. Just enough for Senior Chief Mercer to notice. The old crew chief looked down at the clipboard in his hand and blinked once, hard. Captain Hall stepped forward as if to guide the ceremony back into order, but Calder raised a hand gently. He was not finished. There is one more thing this command should understand, he said. His eyes moved across the pilots, the maintainers, the clerks, the young airmen standing near the aircraft. Commander Bennett did not ask for that story to be told today. She has spent years doing what the best people in uniform often do. Work quietly. Carry the weight. Let the mission matter more than the applause. Claire looked toward the open hangar doors, where sunlight lay across the concrete like a runway. The wind outside moved the flags, and for a moment, the broken wing pin seemed to darken under the shifting light. Evan Brooks stood near the duty desk with his shoulders lower than before. The confidence that had carried him into the confrontation had drained away, leaving behind something smaller and more useful. Shame, maybe, or the beginning of humility. He looked at the registry screen behind him, then reached over and turned the monitor off. The glow vanished. It was the first smart thing he had done all morning. Calder noticed, but said nothing. Claire noticed too. She kept her expression neutral. Evan took one step forward, then stopped, as if his own boots had become heavier. Every eye in the hangar seemed to find him. He had wanted witnesses when he challenged her. Now he had them when he had to answer for it. Commander Bennett, he said. The words came out rougher than he intended. He swallowed and tried again. Commander, I was out of line. Claire did not respond immediately. She let the apology stand on its own, without rescuing him from the discomfort of it. Evan looked at the pin, then forced himself to look at her face. I made an assumption. I turned it into an accusation. I was wrong. The hangar listened. No one smiled. No one mocked him. That was the mercy of a disciplined room. Claire studied him for a long moment. She could have ended him with a sentence. Everyone knew it. Evan knew it most of all. She could have told him that real standards begin with character. She could have made him repeat the apology louder. She could have asked the Admiral to make an example of him. Instead, she picked up her helmet from the chair and held it at her side. "Lieutenant Brooks," she said, "being wrong is not the worst thing a pilot can be." Evan looked up. Claire stepped closer, close enough that he had to stand fully upright. Being certain without checking is worse. Being proud when you should be learning is worse. Treating a person like a problem before you know their story is worse. Her voice remained calm, but every sentence carried the clean edge of truth. Evan nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." Claire's eyes did not soften, but they did not harden either. "Then learn from it." Admiral Calder watched the exchange with the faintest trace of approval. Captain Hall exhaled quietly. Senior Chief Mercer finally moved again, setting his clipboard on a nearby table as though the hangar had been released from a hold. The ceremony could have continued as planned, but it no longer felt like a ceremony. It felt like the lesson had already arrived early, wearing a faded flight suit and a scarred silver wing. Calder turned toward the room. "Take your seats," he said. "And remember this morning." Chairs began to fill, slowly at first, then all at once. But nobody sat the same way they would have 10 minutes earlier. The young airman, near the inspection panel, stood a little taller before lowering himself into the back row. Mason Reed avoided Claire's eyes. Ensign Grant set his coffee down untouched. Evan Brooks remained standing until Claire took her seat near the aisle. Only then did he sit, 2 rows behind her, no longer trying to be seen. Claire placed her helmet on her lap. Her thumb rested near the painted broken wing at the back, not touching it, just close. Outside, another jet rolled along the taxiway, its sound rising through the hangar like distant thunder without danger. The ceremony had not officially begun, but every person there had already understood the first line of it. Some honors do not need to shine to be real. The ceremony began with the usual words, but they did not feel usual anymore. Captain Denise Hall stepped to the podium, welcomed the squadron, thanked the families who had gathered near the side entrance, and spoke about the tradition of naval aviation with the steady professionalism expected of her rank. Yet every sentence seemed to bend toward the woman seated near the aisle with the scarred silver pin on her chest. Claire Bennett sat upright, helmet resting across her lap, eyes forward, hands still. She did not look uncomfortable with attention. She looked practiced at surviving it by giving it nowhere to land. Admiral Calder waited behind the podium with his cap back in place, his face composed again, but the room had already seen what he looked like without the armor of ceremony. That mattered. When Captain Hall introduced him, every person in Hangar 3 stood. Calder walked to the microphone, rested both hands lightly on the sides of the podium, and looked over the hangar. "There are missions we can describe," he said, "and there are missions we can only honor." The line settled over the room with quiet weight. He did not mention Claire's name immediately. Instead, he spoke about discipline in ordinary moments, about the way courage often looked boring until the hour arrived when it mattered. He spoke of maintainers who checked bolts no one would praise them for, watch officers who stayed awake through empty radar screens, pilots who listened more than they talked, and leaders who understood that rank was not a weapon to be swung at people beneath them. Evan Brooks sat 2 rows behind Claire and heard every word as if it had been written for him. Maybe it had. Maybe leadership worked best when everyone in the room could find themselves in the lesson without being named. Claire did not turn around. She kept her gaze on the podium, but when Calder spoke of quiet professionals, her thumb shifted once along the side of her helmet. Near the back row, Senior Chief Mercer leaned toward the young airman beside him and whispered, "Remember that. Quiet does not mean empty." The airman nodded without taking his eyes off Claire. Calder continued, voice calm and clear. "Some of you came here today expecting a story about a night-long past. But remembrance is not about the past staying still. It is about what the past demands from us now. Better judgment, better standards, better respect." The hangar remained silent except for the soft movement of flags at the open doors. The sky has never cared how loud a person is on the ground. It does not care who talks the most in the ready room. It does not care who looks the part. It measures preparation, humility, and the ability to stay steady when easy answers disappear. Claire's eyes lowered for a moment, and the memory returned, not as a full scene, but in fragments. Rain sliding across a canopy, a compass drifting off truth, a voice on the radio trying to stay calm and failing, her own hands moving through the emergency checklist without asking whether anyone would ever know. Then the hangar came back. The polished floor, the rows of uniforms, the broken wing on her lap, and the broken wing over her heart. Calder turned slightly toward her, but not enough to embarrass her. A symbol means nothing when it is worn for attention, he said. It means everything when it is carried as a promise. Evan looked down at his own wings. They were clean, bright, officially issued, and suddenly heavier than they had been before. He understood now that a badge could say a person had qualified, but character decided whether that qualification became honor. When the Admiral finished, no one clapped right away. It was not because they were unmoved. It was because the room needed a second to come back from the truth. Then Senior Chief Mercer stood first. One chair scraped gently against concrete. The young airman stood next. Captain Hall rose. Then the whole hangar rose with them, not in loud celebration, but in a disciplined wave of respect. Claire remained seated for half a breath, as if she had hoped the moment might pass around her. It did not. She finally stood, helmet under one arm, posture straight, face calm. Admiral Calder looked at her from the podium and gave one small nod. She returned it. Nothing more was needed. When the ceremony ended, the hangar did not return to the way it had been. People stood in small groups, speaking softly, as if loud voices would disrespect what had just been uncovered. The folding chairs scraped back into rows. The flags shifted in the wind near the open doors. Outside, sunlight fell across the flight line, bright on the canopies, sharp on the wings, ordinary in a way that made the morning feel even stranger. Claire Bennett moved without drawing attention to herself. She picked up her helmet bag, checked the strap once, and stepped away from the aisle before anyone could decide whether to approach her. That was her instinct. Do the work. Take the lesson. Leave before admiration became another kind of burden. But Evan Brooks rose from his seat and followed at a respectful distance. He did not call out across the hangar. He did not make another performance of himself. He waited until she reached the side of the nearest aircraft, where the shade from the wing crossed the concrete like a clean line. "Commander," he said. Claire stopped, but she did not turn right away. "Lieutenant." Evan took a breath. The words he wanted were too small for what he had done, and he knew it. "I owe you more than the apology I gave in there." Claire turned then. The broken wing pin rested where it had all morning. No brighter, no larger, no different, except now Evan could not look at it without understanding that it represented people, weather, fear, judgment, and the kind of courage that did not need a witness to be real. "You owe the uniform better," Claire said. The sentence was not cruel. That made it harder to hear. Evan nodded. "Yes, ma'am." For a moment, the old version of him seemed to search for something clever to say, something that could soften the shame or make him feel steady again. He found nothing. So he stood there and accepted the silence. Claire studied him as she might study a horizon before takeoff. "You are a good pilot on paper," she said. Evan looked up, surprised by the fairness of it. "But paper does not fly the aircraft when the weather changes. Your hands do. Your judgment does. Your humility does." Behind them, Senior Chief Mercer began directing two airmen back toward the inspection panel. Captain Hall spoke with Admiral Calder near the podium. The room was moving again, but slower, more careful, as if everyone had been given a new checklist they could not afford to ignore. Evan looked down at his polished wings. "I thought standards meant protecting what people earned." Claire adjusted the strap of her helmet bag over her shoulder. "They do. But you cannot protect honor by insulting someone else's. You protect it by asking first, learning fast, and correcting yourself before pride becomes policy." Evan absorbed that. This time, he did not answer immediately. "Understood, Commander." Claire gave one small nod and started toward the open hangar doors. She had nearly reached the sunlight when Admiral Calder called her name. Not loudly, just enough. She stopped. Calder walked to her with his cap under one arm again, though this time the gesture was private, not ceremonial. "Will you be staying with the squadron?" he asked. Claire glanced back at the room, at Mercer, who now watched her with quiet respect. at the young airman standing straighter beside the aircraft, at Evan Brooks, who remained where she had left him, no longer trying to be the center of anything. For now, she said. Calder smiled faintly. Good. They need you. Claire looked at the broken wing pin, then toward the aircraft waiting in the sun. No, sir, she said softly. They need the standard. Then she walked out onto the flight line, the wind catching the edge of her flight suit, the scarred silver pin flashing once before settling back against her heart. No one followed her. No one needed to. By the end of that day, the story had moved through the squadron without anyone adding to it. The pin was not fake. The woman was not ordinary. The lesson was not optional. And from that morning forward, whenever a new pilot entered Hangar 3 too loud, too certain, or too quick to judge, someone would point quietly toward the open doors and say the same thing. Respect is not demanded in this place. It is earned, often before anyone knows your name.